You'd think colonialism was history, something we all read about in textbooks, shook our heads at and moved on from, like flip phones or dial-up internet. But some leaders, some very powerful leaders in Africa, seem to have missed the memo. It's like they went to the How to Decolonize seminar, took notes on what the colonizers did, and then used that as their how-to guide for ruling. It's a truly wild choice. It's like breaking up with a toxic ex and then immediately adopting all their worst habits. I'm free! Now where can I find a ridiculously oversized pith helmet and a map to redraw some borders? So, what does it mean to act like a colonizer? Well, think about it. It's about staying in power forever, as if the presidential palace is a family heirloom. It's about silencing anyone who disagrees with you, treating the country's resources like your personal piggy bank, and making sure the only voice that matters is your own. It's the political equivalent of moving into a house, changing all the locks, and telling the original residents they're now just tenants who need to pay you rent for living in their own home. It's the ultimate irony, fighting for freedom only to become the very thing you fought against. It's a tragic, frustrating, and sometimes darkly comical pattern. These aren't just stories of political maneuvering, they're stories that affect millions of people, shaping the futures of entire nations. So today, we're going to dive deep into this paradox. We're going to look at the leaders who seem to be reading from the colonial playbook, page for page, sometimes even adding their own footnotes. So grab your popcorn, or maybe something stronger, because this is going to be a ride. Let's count down the top 10 African presidents who rule like the colonizers they once fought against. Kicking off our list at number 10, we have a man who has been in power so long, he probably remembers when the Dead Sea was just feeling a little under the weather. I'm talking about Paul Biya of Cameroon. This man has been president since 1982. To put that in perspective, when he came into office, the first CD player had just been sold. Michael Jackson's Thriller was about to drop, and I, your host T, was probably not even a concept. He's seen the rise and fall of the Soviet Union, the invention of the internet, and about 7 different versions of the iPhone, all from the comfort of the presidential palace. Now, longevity alone doesn't make you a colonizer, but it's the style that gets you on this list. Colonial governors were famous for being disconnected from the people they ruled, often spending more time in the European motherland than in the colony itself. Well, Paul Biya has perfected this. He is famously known as the absentee president, spending extended periods, sometimes months at a time, in a luxury hotel in Geneva, Switzerland. Imagine running a country from a hotel suite in another continent. That's not a presidency. That's the world's most expensive and consequential remote work gig. The parallels are just glaring. The colonial governor would rule from a distance, making decisions that affected millions without ever having to walk the streets or listen to the people's concerns. Biya does the same, just with better room service. He maintains his grip on power through a deeply entrenched system of patronage, rewarding loyalty and crushing dissent with an iron fist. The security forces operate with impunity, and political opponents often find themselves in jail or in exile. It's a system designed not for governance but for preservation of power at all costs. This isn't just about one man's love for Swiss chocolate and neutrality, it's about a system of governance that mirrors the colonial structure, a distant, unaccountable ruler, a state apparatus focused on control rather than service, and a population left to fend for itself. The administration is centralized around him, much like the colonial administration was centralized around the governor, who was only answerable to the crown back in Europe. For Biya, it seems he's only answerable to his own desire to remain in power indefinitely. And while he's enjoying the alpine air, Cameroon has faced immense challenges, from economic stagnation to the brutal Anglophone crisis, a conflict that has displaced hundreds of thousands of people. The response from the top has been slow, detached, and often brutal. The classic colonial response to a restive population demanding to be heard. It's a textbook case of a leader who has adopted the very methods of rule that his nation was supposed to have left behind in 1960. For that, Paul Biya, you've earned your spot on this list. Coming in at number 9 is a man who came to power as a liberator, a revolutionary promising a fundamental change. Ladies and gentlemen, Uganda's Yoweri Museveni. He marched into Kampala in 1986, looking every bit the freedom fighter, promising a new dawn for a country ravaged by the brutal regimes of Idi Amin and Milton Obote. He was hailed as part of a new generation of African leaders. The only problem is, That generation forgot to pass the torch. It's like the guy who comes to fix your plumbing, does a great job, and then just decides to live in your bathroom forever. Museveni's early years did bring stability and economic growth, which is why this case is so tragic. He was the guy who said Africa's problem was leaders who overstay their welcome. And then, he proceeded to throw the world's longest goodbye party. He's been in power for over 35 years. He's amended the constitution not once but twice to remove presidential term limits and then the age limit. It's the political equivalent of a video game player who keeps finding cheat codes for extra lives. At this point, he's not just running the country, he's running a dynasty in all but name. The colonial playbook is all about control, and Museveni has become a master of it. He has systematically weakened every institution that could challenge his authority. The opposition is constantly harassed, their rallies broken up, their leaders arrested on trumped-up charges. The musician-turned-politician Bobi Wine has become the face of this new generation struggle, and the state's response has been brutal and public. It's the classic colonial tactic. When faced with a popular movement for change, you don't engage with their ideas, you just try to break their legs. Metaphorically, of course, and sometimes not so metaphorically. His rhetoric too has shifted from that of a liberator to that of a patriarch who knows best. A common attitude of colonial administrators who saw their subjects as children who needed a firm hand. He lectures the youth, dismisses his critics as agents of foreign powers, another classic move, and positions himself as the only person who can guarantee Uganda's stability. It's the ultimate political gaslighting. Without me, this whole place falls apart, so you better keep me around or else. It's a threat disguised as a promise, a tactic as old as empires themselves. So while Museveni may have started as the antidote to tyranny, he has slowly, but surely, adopted its symptoms. The revolutionary hero has become the entrenched ruler. The liberator has become the gatekeeper of power. He's traded his fatigues for a suit and a wide-brimmed hat, but the style of rule, centralized, personalistic, and intolerant of dissent, is a haunting echo of the past Uganda fought so hard to escape. He didn't just overstay his welcome, he remodeled the house and refuses to give back the keys. At number 8, we have a leader whose family runs their country like a family business, a very, very lucrative family business. Welcome to Equatorial Guinea, presided over by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo. He's been in power since 1979, making him the longest-serving non-royal head of state in the world. He came to power by overthrowing his own uncle in a bloody coup. You know, your family get-togethers are tense when the main topic of conversation is, who staged a coup against whom? It's like the world's most violent episode of Succession. Equatorial Guinea is one of Africa's top oil producers. The country is fabulously wealthy. On paper, its GDP per capita is comparable to some European nations, but you wouldn't know it by looking around. The vast majority of the population lives in extreme poverty, lacking access to clean water, education, or basic health care. So where does all the money go? Well, that's where the colonial model kicks in. The colonizers came to Africa to extract resources for the benefit of the metropole, the mother country. For the Obiang regime, the mother country is their own bank accounts. The state's oil wealth is treated as the personal property of the president and his inner circle. His son, Teodoro Obiang, who also happens to be the vice president, is famous worldwide for his lavish lifestyle. We're talking multi-million-dollar mansions in Malibu, a fleet of luxury cars, a private jet, and even Michael Jackson's crystal-encrusted glove. He flaunts a lifestyle that would make a Bond villain blush, all while the people his family is supposed to be serving are struggling to survive. This isn't just governance, it's grand larceny on a national scale. This is the colonial economic model perfected. You don't even need to ship the resources back to Europe, you just wire the money to your accounts in Paris, Geneva, and New York. The country exists not for the benefit of its citizens, but for the enrichment of a tiny, ruling elite. Any dissent is ruthlessly crushed. Political opposition is non-existent, the press is state-controlled, and fear is the primary tool of governance. It's a system of extraction, pure and simple, backed by the brute force of the state. President Obiang has created a system where he is the state, and the state's wealth is his wealth. He once said in an interview that he is in permanent contact with the Almighty, who gives him the strength to rule. It's a divine right of kings argument, updated for the 21st century. The colonial governors had the backing of the crown. Obiang claims to have the backing of God himself. It's the ultimate justification for a rule that has been nothing short of a catastrophe for the people of Equatorial Guinea, making him a shoo-in for this list. Next up at number 7, we visit a country often called the North Korea of Africa, and its leader, Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea, has earned that title. Here is a man who led a heroic 30-year-long struggle for independence from Ethiopia, a true freedom fighter. Eritreans sacrificed everything for their nationhood, which they finally achieved in 1993. The future looked bright. A constitution was drafted, elections were promised, and then, nothing. Absolutely nothing. The constitution was shelved and elections became a forbidden word. Afwerki and his party, the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, have ruled ever since without any pretense of democracy. There is no legislature, no independent judiciary, and no free press. The country is a one-party state, and that one party is Isaias Afwerki. This is not just authoritarianism, it's a complete fusion of one man with the state, a level of control that even the most ambitious colonial governor could only dream of. He has effectively sealed the country off from the outside world, creating a hermit kingdom where his word is law. One of the most colonial aspects of his rule is the system of indefinite national service. Every Eritrean man and woman is forced into military or civil service for an unspecified amount of time. It can last for years, sometimes decades. It's essentially a system of state-sponsored forced labor. People are paid next to nothing and work under brutal conditions. This has created a generation of refugees, with thousands fleeing the country every year to escape this modern-day serfdom. The colonizers used forced labor to build their railways and plantations. Afwerki uses it to control his entire population. The justification for this extreme control is always national security. The long, bloody border war with Ethiopia was used for years as the excuse to postpone democracy and militarize society. But even after a peace deal was signed in 2018, nothing changed. The state of emergency became permanent. It's the classic strongman tactic: create or perpetuate a sense of crisis to justify your iron grip on power. The colonizers did it by constantly talking about pacifying the natives, and Afwerki does it by constantly talking about external enemies, even when they're at peace. Isaias Afwerki's story is one of the most profound betrayals of a revolution. He fought for his people's freedom, only to subject them to a new form of bondage. He governs not through consent, but through fear and coercion. He has turned a nation born from a dream of liberation into a giant open-air prison. The hope of 1993 has curdled into a silent, desperate reality. For creating a system that mirrors the worst aspects of colonial exploitation and control, Isaias Afwerki more than earns his place on this list. Cracking the top half of our list at number 6, we travel to the land of the pharaohs, Egypt, and its current ruler, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Sisi, a former general, came to power in 2013 after leading a military coup that overthrew Egypt's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi. He promised to restore stability after the chaotic years of the Arab Spring. And to be fair, he did restore order. The kind of order you find in a library where the librarian has a tank and isn't afraid to use it if you talk too loud. Sisi's rule is a throwback to the classic man on a horse trope, the military strongman who steps in to save the nation. This was a common justification used by colonial powers when they took over territories. They were bringing order to chaotic lands. Sisi embodies this. His government has overseen one of the most severe crackdowns on human rights in Egypt's modern history. We're talking tens of thousands of political prisoners. Journalists, activists, academics, and anyone with even a mildly critical opinion has been targeted. The space for dissent has shrunk from a room to a shoebox. The colonial powers controlled their territories through a powerful and often brutal security apparatus. Sisi has done the same, empowering the military and police to an unprecedented degree. The military isn't just in charge of security, it's a massive economic player, involved in everything from building bridges to producing pasta. This creates a state within a state, an unaccountable power center whose main priority is its own preservation and profit, very similar to how the British East India Company operated before the Crown took over. Furthermore, Sisi has systematically dismantled the democratic gains of the 2011 revolution. He pushed through constitutional amendments that allow him to stay in power until at least 2030, effectively making him president for life. Elections are held, but they are pure political theater, with no credible opposition allowed to run. It's the colonial practice of creating legislative councils with no real power, designed to give the illusion of representation while keeping all the real authority in the hands of the ruler. So, While el-Sisi may wear a civilian suit, his methods are straight from the military barracks and, by extension, the colonial administrator's office. He rules by decree, prioritizes security over freedom, and treats the population not as citizens with rights, but as subjects to be managed and controlled. He may have promised stability, but what he delivered is the quiet of the graveyard, a forced silence that masks deep-seated grievances. For taking Egypt's democratic dream and putting it under military lockdown, Sisi firmly plants his flag on this list. At number 5, we head down to Zimbabwe to look at a leader who promised a new dispensation, but seems to be using the same old recipe. I'm talking about Emmerson Mnangagwa, also known as the Crocodile. He took over from the legendary and legendarily tyrannical Robert Mugabe in a 2017 military-assisted coup. There was dancing in the streets of Harare. People thought this was it, the end of an era of oppression and economic collapse. The hope was that the Crocodile would lead them to fresh waters. Instead, it seems he just likes the same muddy swamp. Mnangagwa was Mugabe's right-hand man for decades. He was the enforcer, the head of state security during some of the regime's darkest moments, so the idea that he would suddenly transform into a beacon of democracy was, let's be honest, a little optimistic. It's like asking the chief architect of the Death Star to suddenly start designing public parks. You might get a very efficient park, but it will probably have a giant laser that can destroy a planet. The new Zimbabwe under Mnangagwa started looking suspiciously like the old Zimbabwe under Mugabe. The colonial regime in Rhodesia before it became Zimbabwe was built on repression, violence against political opponents, and the control of state institutions for partisan gain. Mugabe's regime perfected this, and Mnangagwa, it turns out, was a very attentive student. The promises of political reform have evaporated. The opposition, the Citizens' Coalition for Change, faces constant harassment. Their members are arrested, their rallies are banned, and elections have been marred by allegations of rigging and voter intimidation. It's the same script, just with a different lead actor. The economic situation also remains dire. While Mnangagwa talks about being open for business, the economy is still plagued by corruption and mismanagement, with the country's mineral wealth benefiting a small, politically connected elite. This is the extractive model of colonialism all over again. The country's resources are not being used to uplift the population, but to enrich the new ruling class, who have simply stepped into the shoes of the old one. The system of patronage and plunder continues, just with new beneficiaries. The most tragic part is the return of state-sponsored violence. Protests over fuel price hikes in 2019 were met with a brutal crackdown by the military, with live ammunition used against civilians. It was a chilling reminder that while the face at the top had changed, the iron fist of the state remained. Mnangagwa promised a break from the past, but he has proven to be a creature of it. He is a continuation, not a correction. For being a master of rebranding while keeping the toxic product exactly the same, Emmerson Mnangagwa, the Crocodile, swims comfortably into our number 5 spot. For our number 4 spot, we go to the Republic of the Congo, not to be confused with its much larger neighbor, the DRC. Here, Denis Sassou Nguesso has been in charge for a combined total of, wait for it, nearly 40 years. He first ruled from 1979 to 1992, lost an election, and then decided democracy wasn't for him, came back to power via a civil war in 1997, and has been there ever since. This isn't just a long presidency, it's a political boomerang. You throw him out, and he just comes right back, usually with more force. Sassou Nguesso's rule is a masterclass in neo-colonial politics. The French colonialists ruled Congo with a firm hand, exploiting its timber and other resources while propping up a compliant local elite. Sassou Nguesso has essentially maintained this structure, just with himself at the very top of the pyramid. He has cultivated close ties with France and other foreign powers, ensuring their political and economic interests are protected in exchange for their turning a blind eye to his undemocratic rule, and a little thing called human rights. It's a cozy relationship that benefits the elites on both sides, at the expense of the Congolese people. Like many others on this list, he has manipulated the constitution to stay in power. In 2015, he held a referendum to remove term and age limits, allowing him to run for yet another term. The referendum was of course marred by boycotts and accusations of fraud, but that didn't stop him. When protests erupted, they were violently suppressed. This is the colonial governor's mindset. The law is not something that applies to you, it's a tool that you use to control others. If the law becomes inconvenient, you simply change it. The country is rich in oil, but just like in Equatorial Guinea, that wealth has not trickled down. It has gushed upwards into the pockets of the president's family and his inner circle. His family members have been implicated in massive corruption scandals, with French courts investigating their lavish spending on luxury properties in Paris. It's the same old story. The nation's patrimony is treated as a private family fund, a direct echo of the exploitative economic logic of colonialism. The country is rich, but the people are poor. Denis Sassou Nguesso represents the ultimate political survivor, a man who has used a combination of brute force, political cunning, and international complicity to maintain his grip on power for a lifetime. He has created a system that serves him and his cronies, a system that looks remarkably like the colonial state it replaced. Extractive, repressive, and deeply unequal. He doesn't just act like a colonizer, he has become a permanent fixture, an emperor ruling over his personal fiefdom on the banks of the Congo River. Number 3. Ali Bongo Ondimba, the Sun King of Gabon. Entering our top 3, we have a case where the presidency is less of an elected office and more of a family inheritance. Welcome to Gabon and the reign of the Bongo dynasty. Ali Bongo Ondimba became president in 2009. His qualification? Well, his father, Omar Bongo, had been president for the previous 42 years. When Omar died, it was less of an election and more of a coronation. The son simply took over from the father. This is not democracy, it's monarchy with extra steps. The French colonialists in Gabon, like elsewhere, groomed a local elite to take over after independence, ensuring that French interests would be maintained. Omar Bongo was the epitome of this system, a master of Francafrique, that shadowy network of personal ties between French and African leaders. He ruled Gabon as his personal kingdom, and when he passed, the kingdom was passed down to his son, Ali. The system of rule didn't change, only the first name of the man in charge. The colonial power may have formally left, but the dynastic, elitist structure they fostered remained perfectly intact. Ali Bongo's presidency has been plagued by controversy from the very beginning. His 2009 election victory was immediately challenged by the opposition, leading to violent protests. His re-election in 2016 was even more contentious. The official results gave him a razor-thin victory, but in his home province the voter turnout was an impossible 99.9%, with 95% of those votes going to him. You don't get numbers that clean even when you're counting your own socks. It was so blatant that it was almost comical, if it weren't a direct assault on the will of the people. Like his father, Ali Bongo has presided over a country incredibly rich in oil and minerals, yet marked by staggering inequality. The Bongo family's wealth is the stuff of legend, with investigations uncovering a portfolio of dozens of luxury properties in France, fleets of expensive cars, and bank accounts stuffed with cash. This is, once again, the colonial extractive model in its purest form. The nation's wealth is siphoned off for the benefit of the ruling family, who live like modern-day European royalty, while a significant portion of the population lacks basic services. Ali Bongo's rule, until his recent ousting in a coup in 2023, was a perfect example of how colonial power structures can be inherited and perpetuated by a local dynasty. It was a system built on the idea that the country and its resources belong to one family, to be passed down from father to son. The Bongo family didn't fight colonialism, they just privatized it. For turning a republic into a family heirloom and ruling like a prince who inherited the throne, Ali Bongo Ondimba takes the bronze medal in our countdown. Number 2, Faure Gnassingbé, the other Sun King of Togo. Taking the silver medal at number 2, we have another case of like father, like son. We're going to Togo, a country that has been ruled by the Gnassingbé family for over 50 years. Faure Gnassingbé became president in 2005. How, you ask? Well, his father, Gnassingbé Eyadema, who had ruled the country with an iron fist for 38 years, died. The military, in a move that would make a kingmaker proud, immediately installed the son as president. It was a coup, plain and simple, a palace inheritance that completely bypassed the constitution. The public outcry was so immense, both domestically and internationally, that Faure was forced to step down and hold an election which, surprise surprise, he won, amidst widespread allegations of fraud and a violent crackdown that killed hundreds of people. This set the tone for his entire presidency. It's a rule that began in illegitimacy and has been maintained through force and political manipulation It's the colonial succession model. The old governor dies and the capital sends in a new one, except in this case the capital was the army barracks, and the new governor was the old one's son. The parallels to the colonial era are stark. Gnassingbé Eyadema, the father, was a soldier in the French colonial army before he seized power. He built a regime based on fear, a powerful military, and a cult of personality. Faure Gnassingbé inherited this entire apparatus. He didn't build a new system, he just took the keys to the old one. He has resisted all meaningful democratic reforms, especially presidential term limits. He has amended the constitution to allow himself to stay in power potentially until 2030. The goal is not public service, but dynastic survival. The Togolese opposition has been fighting for decades for a return to democracy, for a simple respect of the constitution. Their protests are regularly met with tear gas, arrests, and violence. The state acts not as a neutral arbiter, but as the private security force of the ruling family. It's the classic colonial dynamic, a small entrenched elite using the instruments of state power to suppress the aspirations of the wider population. The government is not of the people or for the people, it is for the Gnassingbés. Faure Gnassingbé represents the normalization of dynastic rule in a republic. His power derives not from a popular mandate but from his name and his control of the security forces. He has continued his father's legacy of authoritarian rule, treating Togo as a family possession. It's a flagrant, multi-generational rejection of the democratic principles that are supposed to define a post-colonial nation. For successfully turning a country into a family business for over half a century, Faure Gnassingbé is our runner-up. Number 1. Idriss Déby, the warrior king of the Sahel. And now, for the number 1 spot on our list, the gold medal for ruling like a colonizer, we go to the late Idriss Déby of Chad. Now you might say he passed away in 2021. And you'd be right. But his legacy, his style of rule, and the succession that followed his death are the ultimate embodiment of the neo-colonial strongman. And let's be real, his son immediately took over, so the system he built is still running the show. Déby ruled Chad for over 30 years after seizing power in a rebellion in 1990. He wasn't a president, he was a warrior king. Déby's entire rule was defined by military dominance. He was a French-trained military officer who lived and died by the sword. He governed Chad not as a nation of citizens, but as a barracks to be commanded. The country was in a perpetual state of war, fighting off countless rebel insurgencies, many of which were led by his own former allies or even family members. This constant state of conflict was his ultimate justification for his authoritarian grip. It's the colonizers' emergency power, but made permanent. We can't have democracy now, there are enemies at the gates, and he made sure there were always enemies at the gates. He was a key ally of the West, particularly France, in the fight against terrorism in the Sahel. This gave him what I call the authoritarian hall pass. Western powers, needing his army's prowess, looked the other way on his human rights abuses, his rigged elections, and his plundering of the country's oil wealth. This is the absolute peak of neo-colonialism. He acted as the West's gendarme in Africa, and in return he was allowed to run his country like a personal military fiefdom, accountable to no one but his foreign patrons. The colonial powers used to rule directly, now they just subcontract. The institutions of state in Chad were completely hollowed out and replaced by Déby's personal authority. The army was his private guard, the national treasury was his personal wallet, and the law was whatever he said it was. He changed the constitution to abolish term limits, ensuring he could be president for life. Elections were a joke, with Déby winning every time with landslide margins that defied belief. He created a system so dependent on him, so centralized around his military persona, that the state and the man became one. And the ultimate proof of his colonial-style rule came at his death. He was killed on the battlefield, a warrior to the end. What happened next? Did the Speaker of the Parliament take over as the Constitution dictated? Of course not. A military council, led by his 37-year-old son, Mohammed Déby, seized power immediately. They suspended the Constitution and dissolved the government. The presidency was passed from father to son like a chieftain's spear. It was the final undeniable proof that Idriss Déby had not built a nation, but a dynasty, a military monarchy, in all but name, propped up by foreign interests and domestic force. For perfecting the art of the modern warrior king, Idriss Déby is our #1 African leader who ruled like a colonizer. So there you have it. 10 leaders, 10 stories of power, control, and a tragic, bitter irony. From the absentee president to the warrior king, we see a pattern. The consolidation of power, the silencing of dissent, the treatment of national wealth as a personal slush fund, and the manipulation of laws to ensure indefinite rule. These aren't the actions of liberators, these are the echoes of the colonial governors and district commissioners who once ruled these very lands. They are the echo of a past that was supposed to be buried, not a voice for the future. History shouldn't repeat itself, especially not at the hands of those who were once its victims. The fight for Africa's liberation was a fight for dignity, for self-determination, for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It wasn't a struggle to simply swap a white master for a black one. The true measure of freedom isn't just about who is in the presidential palace, but about how they govern once they're there. It's about building institutions, not just cults of personality. It's about serving the public, not just enriching the family. This list is by no means exhaustive, and the situation is constantly changing. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Did we miss anyone? Are there other leaders who you think fit this pattern? Let us know in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going, because awareness is the first step towards change. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Stay engaged, stay informed.